Welcome back to the Ocean Ideas podcast, brought to you by the Ocean Lovers Festival, a platform for change for our blue planet. Today we're joined by the Golden Girl of Sailing and Festival Ambassador Lisa Blair, who takes us on her wild solo journey around the world and shares how confronting oceans of plastic inspired her to turn passion into purpose and step up for the planet.
I'm going to take you on a bit of a wild ride, but I'm also going to be sharing my sustainability passion and where that came from. And I'm a huge believer that if we combine passion with purpose, then we really can inspire, ignite, and create action. So my passion's obviously sailing. I love open ocean sailing, and I came to it quite late in life at the age of 25. But once I discovered it, I just wanted to keep having these adventures. And that led me on a journey to discover my purpose. Now, I'd sailed a boat the whole way around the planet, and in one section of this voyage, we were more than 20 days from land, halfway between South Africa and Australia. And as I was sailing, I was helming this boat with a crew of 16 people on board, and I looked out across the horizon, and out of nowhere, I saw something that didn't quite make sense. And as we got closer and closer to this object in the water, I noticed that it was a styrofoam box floating in the middle of the Southern Ocean, closer to Antarctica than any other landmass. And I was just thinking to myself, what's it doing out here? We then sailed from there up towards Australia, towards China, and across the North Pacific. And there were whole sections of that voyage where we were literally sailing through a sea of plastic. At one time, we had to put another crew member on the bow of the boat with a boat hook to physically push the rubbish and the debris out of the way of the boat so that we could sail through. This was over a decade ago, in 2012. And I'm thinking to myself, what are we doing? And at the time, I felt so incredibly overwhelmed by it, I didn't know what I could do to help. So I did nothing. I took no action. And I would still take my one plastic bag, my one straw, and think, it's just one person, it doesn't matter. It's not big enough to matter. It took me a little while to get there, but when I finally started to think it through, I started to change my attitude and think to myself, well, hang on, we've got 8 billion people on this planet. If 8 billion people are doing one action, we're creating impact, we're creating difference. So it informed me, and I decided that I wanted to launch this campaign to sail solo, non-stop and unassisted around Antarctica. I couldn't think of a larger project that I felt I was capable of doing to raise a spotlight and create awareness around sustainability in our oceans. And I launched a campaign called Climate Action Now. And so what I do is I go out to community members like yourselves, and I ask you to fill out a post-it note message. And each post-it note is an environmental action on something that you're already doing towards a better future. So Sally has short showers, Joe turns the lights off when he leaves the room, Bob, he picks up rubbish every time he walks his dog at the beach. And it's about showcasing and highlighting these everyday micro actions towards a better future that everyone in our community can take. I then took those messages, we turned them into the digital design, and if you ever come and see a photo of my boat, you'll see she's wrapped in thousands and thousands of the community's messages, the community's actions. So it was no longer about a girl on this voyage to sail around Antarctica solo, and more about how I could carry and amplify this message of climate action now. Now, I left in 2017. I'd worked for 3.5 years to get the funding together, to get the boat, to risk assess, to try and make sure that the project was going to be as successful as I could possibly make it. And I set off into the Southern Ocean on my own, expecting to be at sea for 3 to 4 months. And as I sailed into the freezing cold, grey, wet conditions of the Southern Ocean, I went across the South Pacific and I entered or rounded Cape Horn. I went across the South Atlantic Ocean, and my trip came unstuck at that point. I'd been at sea for 72 days when my mast came crashing down in a storm, and it snapped off at deck level, putting me into a near-death, absolute edge-of-your-seat survival situation. I suffered hypothermia, and I almost lost the boat that night, which would have meant I would have lost my life. But I was able to fight my way through and eventually make my way to South Africa in Cape Town, where I repaired the vessel, restarted the voyage, sailed back to where I dismasted, and originally set the record as the first woman in the world to sail around Antarctica with one stop. It took me 5 years to overcome the trauma of that journey, but I also knew that I needed to continue to advocate. I needed to continue to promote this message of climate action now. So in 2022, I decided that I was going to go again. And in January of 2022, I set off back into the Southern Ocean to that place that almost claimed me last time. And I spent the next 3 months surviving and existing down there. We went through a storm that generated 15-metre waves. So imagine a 3 to 4 story building as a wave, and you're on your own on a boat in the middle of the ocean. My poor vessel was flipped upside down 3 times in those extreme conditions, and we were battered and bruised, but we made it through. Now, that is an incredible achievement. I became the fastest person in the world to sail around Antarctica. But for me, what's even more powerful and more impactful was I was able to collaborate with researchers and scientists around the globe. I effectively raised my hand and said, "Crazy sailor here, I'm going to be in the Southern Ocean for 3 months. What research can I do for you that's going to help us better understand our oceans?" So we actually converted the sail locker on board the vessel into a micro lab at sea. And I started my microplastics research and ocean health research. And with that, I was able to get the project endorsed as a Decade of Ocean Science initiative through the United Nations, and I was able to continue to elevate and create that advocacy. Now, we completed the largest microplastic survey on board my vessel, solo in the Southern Ocean, that's ever taken place in Antarctica, for the number of samples collected and also the spatial distribution of those samples. Now, out of that, we actually found plastic in every single sample. So every day of me sailing across the Southern Ocean, I sailed through a literal sea of plastic. Now, for those who haven't heard of the term microplastics before, if you have something like a bottle cap, when that goes out to sea, it eventually breaks up due to, a number of different environmental factors. And that one bottle cap, one tiny, tiny piece of plastic, will become over 1 million particles of microplastics in our oceans. So what's happening is that 1 million particles is then spreading so much further, and it's impacting so many more animals and species around our world, and it's entering the food chain much earlier state. Now, there's a bunch of stats I can spew at you, like we only see 2% of the actual plastic that's in the ocean, or the fact that when I sampled all of this plastic, 64% of it was microfiber from the textile industry, from the clothing that we wear. But I want to offer you solutions over problems. And there's a number of things that we can do as individuals to minimise our impact with microplastics. You can choose to buy non-synthetic clothing, so organic matter like bamboo, cotton, hemp. You can put a filter on your washing machine, because every time you do an average load of laundry, around 300 particles of microplastics enter the waste distribution system. We don't filter it out, and all our wastewater actually ends up in the ocean. So every household, everywhere in the world, is unintentionally impacting our oceans. We can also do things like buy quality products that we repair over replace. And we can drive less, because 30% of all microplastics is actually from car tyres. They make them with a combination of rubber and plastic these days, which just blows my mind. Now, there's obviously more work to be done, and I haven't stopped yet. I currently hold 8 world records in ocean sailing, and I've used that entire time to advocate, create awareness around this message of climate action now, and around the concept that we as individuals all have the power to create change. KPMG recently released a number of statistics in collaboration with MIT, and it showed who are the influencers of our society through media. And it actually showed that athletes influence the media by 55%. So they hold an influence 55% to be able to impact our communities. Now, out of that, we then saw that less than 6% was politicians and 1% was scientists. So there's obviously an incredible need for advocacy and communicators of ocean health and ocean research that can partner with scientific communities and actually help amplify their message so that we can spread that awareness further. So I'm now turning my attention to the Arctic Circle. And my goal is to go and become the first human in the world to sail solo, non-stop and unassisted around the Arctic. It's never been done before. It's only possible because of the amount of ice that's melting through climate change. So from a storytelling and an impact position, it's an incredibly powerful piece. But on top of that, I've been learning around other stresses to our oceans, and I've been getting educated around fiberglass and fiberglass pollution. We currently have 40 million fiberglass recreational boats reaching their end of life now, and no strategy as to what we're going to do with the megatons of waste that's entering our oceans. And it's cost prohibitive to actually recycle your vessel. My boat is a 50-foot vessel. For me to just send the boat to landfill, it would cost me $15,000. So your last boat owner is the least capable of disposing of their vessel. And so they now estimate that 1% to 2% of all fiberglass boats are getting sunk or abandoned at sea just so that people can avoid paying that cost. And that equates to around 100,000 boats in Europe alone getting purposely sunk and abandoned. Now, a lot of people think they become artificial reefs, but what actually happens is they break down into microplastics and micro impacts on our oceans. There was a study out of Chichester where they sampled oysters, and they did 1 kilogram of oysters in a harbour, and they actually pulled out 7,000 shards of fiberglass from 1 kilogram of oyster. Now, that was one harbour in one location in one place on the planet. So I'm one person. I'm heading off on this incredible campaign. I want you to support the project, share it. Please come and add a post-it note to the project, because every new world record, I update the wrap on the hull of the boat. So your message of climate action will actually go on my boat for that project. And I want you to think about the fact that I'm just one person. I'm one girl that saw an issue and decided to take action instead of sitting on the sideline. So it begs the question to ask yourself, what can you do? What action can you take? What's within your sphere of influence? So thank you so much for joining us today and coming down and participating in the Ocean Lovers Festival.
Thanks for tuning in to the Ocean Ideas podcast, brought to you by the Ocean Lovers Festival. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure to follow us on socials for more ocean inspiration, and keep an eye out as we start to announce elements of our 2026 festival program later this November. Together, let's turn the tide for a brighter, bluer future.